Joining us now live, I think from Beijing. This is the anniversary, the horrible anniversary of Tiananmen Square, is Ava Chen, and she is with the new federal state of China. You can follow her at NFSC Speak, NFSC Speak. Anna, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, John. And I'm actually live from New York City. Behind me is the Statue of Liberty. So today is such a, as we remember a pivotal and painful moment in modern Chinese history, the June 4th, 1989, the day of the Tiananmen Square massacre. That day, in full view of the world, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, gripped by fear of losing political control in China, slaughtered tens of thousands of innocent people, students, everyday citizens, asking only for freedom and political reform and dignity. So today on this program, I prepared to share with you a little bit of truth. I think the truth was so far away from people. It came from a once classified British diplomatic cable, was declassified in 2017. And it was written by the then British ambassador, Sir Alan Donald, just one day after the massacre. So it contains the detail that still would send chill down the spine. So let me share these words with you because I think truth matters, especially now. So Sir Alan described how the army that committed the atrocity is the 27th Army of the People's Liberation Army, PLA, troops of the CCP. And this particular 27th Army coming from Shanxi province and was made up of men who were 60% illiterate. They were chosen for their obedience. They had been isolated for 10 days with no access to news prior to the massacre. And they were told they were going to a military training exercise, not to kill their own people. But on the night of the June 3rd to the early morning of the 4th, the plan was cold and calculated. The first wave of troops moved into the square did not carry any weapons. And the second wave would carry weapons but with no armor. And the third wave would again be unarmed, only with the army officers carrying sidearms to scare off the students, the crowd. And then came the fourth wave, the 27th Army, fully armed and ready to kill. When the first wave failed to push back the largely peaceful crowd, the 27th Army opened fire indiscriminately on civilians and even fellow soldiers. Then they ran over people with armed personnel carriers going 40 miles per hour. Sir Alan wrote that the students thought they had been given an hour to leave the square, but just 5 minutes after the announcement, the attack began. The students linked arms, refused to run. They were mown down. The APC, the armed personnel carriers, crushed their bodies again and again until, in Sir Alan's words, their remains were turned into, quote, pie, unquote. Bulldozers came to clean up what was left. Wounded girl students begged for their lives. They were stabbed. A 3-year-old girl was injured and her mother was shot trying to save her. Even Army ambulance and those Chinese Sino-Japanese medical center ambulance were fired upon. Medical crew was shot and a driver trying to help was blown into pieces by an anti-tank weapon. When army officers was shot by his own troops because he hesitated, they said they would have been killed if they had not killed this army officer. And the final sentence of this cable reads, quote, minimum estimation of civilian dead, 10,000, end of quote. But the massacre did not end on June 4th, early morning. What followed with the CCP's second best weapon, propaganda. The regime mutilated the bodies of the dead soldiers and showed them on television, a newspaper with pictures, claiming the students were violent mobs who deserved what happened. And they lied about the death toll, claiming just 200 to 300 civilians dead. They banned all mentioning of the massacre from textbooks, media, and public discourse. They erased history in real time. And inside China, the June 4th, 1989 event remained the most censored topic even today. And as a result of the CCP's censorship, most of today's Chinese youth have never, ever heard of June 4th. In fact, according to the work that done by an author, Louisa Lim, in her research, writing his book, she finds out only 15 out of 100 college students today recognize the iconic photo of a tank man, one of the most powerful image ever captured out of this tragedy. And yet, it's been scrubbed from the minds of generations of Chinese people until June 4th, 2020. Miles Guo, the founder of the new federal state of China, came along. And he never forget what he has experienced and observed. He actually was arrested on May 26, 1989, just several days prior to the massacre happened, as the student movement and the protests gaining the steam throughout the springtime of that year, 1989, from April to May. Just days before the massacre, he actually financially supported the students in building a 33-foot tall goddess of democracy statue, very similar to the one that behind me, sitting at the New York Harbor today. And that same day, his younger brother, during his arrest on May 26, was shot to death by the CCP police. And Miles was imprisoned for nearly 2 years alongside with other prisoners of conscience. These are religious leaders and professors who supported the student movement. Many of them was executed, some just meters from Miles Guo's cell. We remember one of the vivid story that he told us about a particular young cellmate, a young man who not even 18 years old, and he was still a virgin boy, but was charged with raping. And he was tortured in the cell with electrical shocks a dozen of times every day, but he never yielded. On the day of his execution, he yielded the following sentence, which I think deeply engraved in the mind of Miles Guo. And it goes, "The Chinese people are like dry tinder, waiting to ignite. A single spark could set off a blazing fire." And Miles Guo is that sparks, and leadership, inspiration, and action. And here comes the 5th anniversary of the new federal state of China, established on June 4th, 2020, and declared by Miles Guo and the co-founder of the new federal state of China, Stephen K. Bannon, in the harbor right behind me. So as Miles fighting along his battle against the CCP for the last 8 years, he had reviewed and exposed the corruption of the CCP and the nefarious deeds that the CCP has planned or has already unleashed to the world. And that's because he's scared of the regime. That's because the spark, the inspiration, and the passion that he lit off the Chinese people. This is why he was the enemy number one declared by the regime. And the regime, matter of fact, has launched an international manhunt for the last 8 years, trying to capture him, which they have been successful, I would have to say, because as we're speaking today, he has been still locked behind bars in jail in MDC, in the Metropolitan Detention Center. And today is 812th day that he lost his freedom since 2023, March 15th. But we didn't forget the martyrs and the students died that night. And we're united ever than before, facing the adversity. And we will finish the job that started by those young students and martyred that died that night on the Tiananmen Square. So I'm very grateful for you to give me this opportunity to come here and share with this brutal truth with the people around the world. Because let's not forget, many years ago, when this happening on international television around the world, the June 4th is obviously a turning point for all the Chinese people. But I would have to say, all those years, it is actually looking back, that day, it was a turning point for the world. The reason why is, as the Chinese people endured the suffering, the West extended an olive branch to the most genocidal and murderous regime on the planet Earth. The George W. Bush administration turned a blind eye, and he secretly sends secret envoy to the CCP in discussing in closed-door meetings about keeping engaging with this evil regime. So the Chinese people were sacrificed.
So why did George H., in your opinion, Ava,
you have to pay
why
attention.
why did George H., President George H. Bush, and we all know that he looked the other way here and tried to re-engage the Chinese and not get this out? Why did he do that?
Don't forget, just a year prior to he won the president election. He was the CIA chief in China. So don't ever forget that. And everything, when history comes back and then again, I think, especially in the moment of the MAGA movement, of the fight of the American people, and we see the convergence of evil and those communists and whoever the evil forces out there that trying to enslave the entire humanity, people are going to connect the dots together. Because the West turned a blind eye, because the propaganda they sold to American people was under a false premises and a false impression that engage and bringing communist China in a global economy, it will enrich the Chinese people, it will better the country, but it didn't. Okay, it only enriched a very small amount of the CCP top elites. And at the back of the slave labor, the sweat, the blood, and lives of Chinese slaves rose the privileged members of the globalist elite, the globalist club that we call the globalism and globalist. And the so-called economic miracle really was only benefited to a small circle, inner circle of those CCP officials and their families, and Wall Street. To be honest, Wall Street and power brokers.
You think with this, I agree with all that, obviously. But if you think when this order was given by the CCP, by the premier, whoever it was, the military that gave this order, do you think that one of the calculations they made was that President Bush in the United States at the time wouldn't do anything about it? You think that went into their calculation?
Absolutely. Actually, Miles reviewed this facts, on live streaming. In May 22nd, the CCP has already made a decision on the massacre that's about to happen in the night of June 3rd and lasted until to the morning of June 4th. They already knew, and America knew. There are people in America, not many people knew, but there are people inside America knew what's going to happen because they have already tacitly entered a business deals in which sold out the 1.2 billion Chinese people at that critical turning
point. So you're saying that you believe, your conjecture, your allegation is that people in the U.S. government in high positions knew this was coming. We did nothing because there was controlling business interests there on Wall Street and other areas in the country that they wanted stabilization for their investments to play out that they had already made there. So your hypothesis is that we knew and we looked the other way in order to protect Wall Street and the globalist crowd and the elites. Is that your hypothesis here?
Yes, but I don't know who knew, who didn't knew. Okay, but there are people in the United States, very few of them knew what's going to happen, and they let it happen. But what matters is afterwards, what happened. The massacre has happened. in front of the world, and minimum tens of thousands civilians was slaughtered on TV. Okay, and this is less than a month after the event. The secret envoy that was dispatched by President Bush at the time to China, and they're already declassified documents. You can search on internet, and you will find all those conversations that happened, and their only interest in business, in profiting of what's we know for the last 3 decades, the factory of the world, that is China. And that basically, United States, the people's, American people's lives and your experience, the crisis that you experienced in the last 3 decades is a culmination, is a result of that decision 36 years ago. Because CCP didn't change. It changed.
Right. So the business interest of the U.S. on Wall Street, the money interest, are what drove the decision. And then, I mean, this is a matter of history. There's no allegation. George W. did nothing, right? Or George H., I'm sorry, he did nothing. And he did send an envoy there a month later to re-engage and to assure the business community that, you know, things would stay the same after that upheaval. Now that is fact, right? We know that for a fact. He did send an envoy there. But as you describe this, Ava, and you outline it, you know, we think back about those of us that are older like me that remember this day in 1989. And even in the U.S., I mean, it was not really played up the way you're mentioning it. It was basically, hey, the military went in, they broke up the protest, and now it's back to usual. But they didn't really play it on American TV, to my recollection, the way you're describing it. And as you say, in the CCP in China, it's been eradicated from the history books. Thank you for keeping it alive. Thank you for telling people the truth, Ava. You can follow Ava at NFSC Speak.
And John, can I let your audience know that we have actually official commemoration starts tonight, kickoff at War Room from 6 to 7, and then we continue with the Chinese program from 10 p.m. tonight and all the way to next day morning, 10 a.m. And we have 12 venues across the world, and these are Chinese diasporas carry the torch of the fight for freedom in 4 continents. And then we will come back with the second round of English programming starting at the 2nd hour with War Room tomorrow. And then we'll continue all the way to the afternoon and 1 p.m. So please do joining us on such an important and critical day, not only celebrating the 5th anniversary of the new federal state of China, but also remember those brave and courageous young lives lost for the fight for freedom. So thank you very much, John, having me today.
Ava, always an honor to have you, and keep fighting the good fight. Thank you. Dr. Kirk Elliott coming up next. Keep it right here.